My name's Matt. If I haven't met you, come and introduce yourself. Love to meet you. Tonight, I want to have a look. I'm going to go back to the beginning of the Bible. I've been a little preoccupied with these first chapters of the Bible lately, but there's something I want to draw out of this. You know, one of the things that I've been saying about this first part of the Bible is that it's not just about the beginnings of the world. This is actually largely about how we are to live our lives, and all of the principles around how we are called to live are actually embedded in this amazing account, the creation account. And today I want to focus on the climax of this account, where this ends up, and I've sort of been moving towards this. Now, for those of you who haven't been on the journey, Genesis chapter 1 is a stunning account, a very dense theological account of the creation of the world. And the whole text is structured to say something. Even the amount of times that different words are used, the shape of the text, the way that it's all pictured is there to convey the sense of order. This is all about God giving order to the world. That's the whole of the first chapter of Genesis conveys that. And it's conveyed not only by what it says, but even by the shape of the text. You get this sense, and right at the start, there's this sense that there's this picture of a kind of watery chaos, you know. And then God brings order to this world, and he creates spaces for life, and everything is put in its right place. And, as a result, we live in this perfectly ordered universe, in a perfectly ordered world and perfectly ordered ecosystems. We've stuffed it up a fair bit, but originally it was really good, right? It was exactly the way it was meant to be, right? And this is the sense that we get. So everything is really, really well ordered. And this is I think the profound element for us to take away tonight. The result of all of that ordering, the result of everything being rightly ordered. And what I mean by that is God creates the world. He sets human beings where they're meant to be in relation to the world, in relation to him, right? Everything is in its right order. All the relationships, human beings to God and to the other creatures and to the earth, and everything is in its right relationship. The result of everything being rightly ordered is a state of rest. Rest is the result of order. And tonight, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this rest. And so I'm going to read from the very first part of Genesis chapter 2. So this is the seventh day. So we have 6 days of creation. And then it says this in Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy. And that idea of holiness is a sense of set apartness, right? It's like he lifted it up and made it sacred. And there's something interesting about the seventh day that I want us to note here. So God blessed the seventh day, lifts it up, makes it holy, like sacred, that means. Because on it he rested from all his work that he had done in creation. And it finishes there. Now, on each of the 6 days that we have, the 6 days of creation, each day ends with, and it was evening and it was morning, the first day, second day, and each day ends with that. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. There was evening, there was morning, the second day. There was evening, and it goes right through the text. Now, the interesting thing is that you don't get that formula. Now, everything in this text, it's so condensed, and everything has theological significance. So, at the end of this day, you don't get that formula. So, in a sense, this is a sort of kind of non-ending day. So in fact, it's not even just a day. There's a sense in which this is actually a kind of realm, like a realm of rest in a sense here. And it says that God blesses this day, this sort of unending day. There's a sense in which, time goes on. God is, even the one who creates time. That goes on, normal daily life goes on. But there's this eternal state of rest that is established there. And essentially implicit here is this sense in which God is calling human beings up into this realm, like feet on the ground, living life in the world with all the necessities of the world, but in a sense with hearts invested in this state, what I'm going to describe as a state of rest, or the Hebrew word for this is Sabbath. Feet on the ground, and yet in one sense in a state of rest. And implicit here, as I said, is that God is calling us up. He is inviting us into this state of rest. So, what does he mean by rest? When it says that God rested on the seventh day, let's just assume that God's not tired. He doesn't rest because he's tired. And this is not a rest of inactivity. Because God, in a sense, where that rest of God, the Sabbath of God continues. And God has been active, so it's not inactivity. This is a rest of authority. This is a rest of rule. It's a rest that has come about because everything is in its right place. The Lord's Prayer says, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. There's a sense in the heavenly realm, the realm of God's rest, the eternal realm of God's rest, God's will is done, everything is rightly ordered, and therefore there is a state of rest. Now, of course, what happens in the biblical story is that we mess up the order, right? We cut ourselves off from God, and the whole world sort of descends into a state of chaos. There's still lots that's good about it because it was created good, and there's lots of that goodness left. But the world descends into a state of chaos, and so you get unrest. And hence the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. So the rest of God is a rest of rule. It's a rest of authority. Everything is in the right order. It says, for example, of various kings in the stories of the kings in the Old Testament and in the book of Kings and the book of Chronicles, we have all these great stories. And I encourage you to read these stories. They get pretty weird, but if you haven't read, there's some great stories. And it says there are good kings and then there are bad kings. And when the kings that do it wrong, that order things in their own way, there's a sense in which their kingdoms dissolve into a state of chaos, right? And inevitably also a state of oppression. Often, they're attacked and just constantly beleaguered by other kingdoms, right? They're in a state of unrest. On the other hand, those kings who put their houses in order, that put their kingdoms in order, it's often said of them that the Lord gave them rest on every side. Let me give you an example. So 2 Chronicles 20 verse 30 about Jehoshaphat, who's a godly king, it says, and the kingdom of Jehoshaphat was at peace, for his God had given him rest on every side. He put his house in order. And because he put things in order, what ensued was a state of rest. It's a little bit like when you clean up your room or your house, or, you clean up your garden and, you just feel like you sit down on the couch and you look around and you just feel relaxed, because you've put things in order. Now, I'm not talking so much just about putting our externals in order. Today, I'm going to talk about putting this in the right order. That a state of rest comes from our hearts being in the right order. But what you see in these stories of the kings is, of course, they put their hearts in the right order, but as they put their houses or their kingdoms in order, and this is a wonderful picture for us, what ensues is a state of rest. It's exactly what we read about in Genesis chapter 1. Because in Genesis chapter 1, God takes begins with a chaotic situation. It's not bad, it's just unfinished. He puts everything in the right order, everything's ordered, and as a result of that, there's a state of rest. And this is also said, one of my favorite stories in the Old Testament is you may not have ever heard of this guy if you're new to the Bible particularly, but there's a story of a king called Asa. And it's kind of a sad story at the end, and you can read it for yourself, at least in the Chronicles account. But it says, this is what it says about Asa, and this is a great example okay, of rest coming to someone that puts their house in order. Okay, so hang with me here, because this is a really important idea. This is ultimately about you and how you choose to live your life. So it says about Asa. Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He removed the foreign altars and the high places. He smashed the sacred stones and he cut down the Asherah poles. In other words, his people were running after all different things. Their hearts were going after all sorts of different false gods. They were trusting in other things, and God was demoted right down the line. Things were out of order. And so what he is doing is he's putting the most important things first, and ultimately that's God. So he's throwing out these things, and it goes on to say he commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their ancestors, and to obey his laws and his commands. He removed the high places and incense altars in every town in Judah, and the kingdom was at peace under him. He built up the fortified cities of Judah since the land was at peace. No one was at war with him during those years, for the Lord gave him rest. Sabbath. The rest came as a result of things being put in the right order. Rest and order. Now, what this means, and this is what I want to focus on today, is the sense in which unrest comes from disorder. And I want to diagnose this today, because a lot of people, and maybe this is you tonight, maybe you feel exhausted, maybe you feel overwhelmed, maybe you've got so much going on and you feel like you need a break. Maybe you do need physical and mental recuperation. That may well be the case. But there is a certain kind of turmoil. There's a certain kind of unrest that a nice beach holiday won't solve. Not even a public holiday on Monday will solve your state of unrest. And I want to talk a little bit about this, because often we don't get the rest that we need because we don't understand what it is that we need rest from. And you can have as many beach holidays as you want and still live in a state of turmoil, because turmoil ensues when things are out of order. When things are out of order in your hearts. When you, for example, give ultimate concern to things that don't ultimately matter. When you give ultimate concern to things that don't ultimately matter. That's an example of you disordering things. It's a lot about what happens in our hearts. When you run after things that are not as important. I mean, all of our desires, in a sense, we suppress some desires for the sake of others. I want to get fit, so part of me wants to sit on the couch and watch TV, but I'll get up and I'll go for a run. So one desire trumps the other desire, right? And then and so we have, in a sense, this kind of hierarchy of desires. And when that hierarchy of desires gets out of whack, right? When we chase things that are less important like they're most important, then we end up in a state of turmoil, unrest. This is probably something that's going on for a lot of us. And I'll explain to you how this happens. Because in the absence of God, when we choose, and unfortunately, we do all choose to some extent to live and do things without God. We all do it in some way. We're just going to run off. We're going to go it alone, right? And God is very gracious with us, and he says, excuse me, are you going to let me be a part of? And whenever we do that, whenever we run off on our own and do things without God, things become more and more and more chaotic, out of order, and there is more and more unrest. You know the feeling when things get more and more out of kilter and it feels like internal unrest, doesn't it? It feels like things are going to chaos in here. And inevitably, it's because the further you go away from God, the more all of your desires get out of order. Because this is inevitable. Because when God is not over the top of all of those things, all of these influences come in. Like when we step out from under God and we go it alone, then the vacuum of authority in our lives gets filled with a plethora of other influences that comes in, all the little voices, right? And they could be voices of, peer groups or society or expectations that people put on you, or particularly expectations that you put upon yourself. And these expectations, these desires that you become beholden to, they begin to bind you up. You get this inner tyranny. We are our own worst, tyrants, really. This is the voice in our head that says, you've got to succeed in that. You've got to make sure you've got to be better than that person, and you've got to be the best at this, and you've got to make sure that you don't fail with this, and you've got to prove yourself, and you've got to, curate your identity so that everyone likes you. When you go into that situation, it's this constant voice that tells you, you must do this, you must do that, you must do, and it's absolutely exhausting. When God is saying to you, you don't have to do any of that. There's a wonderful simplicity when we come under God, because he says, no, all I want you to do is love me and love my kids, and that's life. And there's a beautiful simplicity, there's a beautiful rest, but when we come out from under that, all of these little voices of all the things that we think we've got to do, and they will come. I believe me, this rabble, it's like a rabble of voices that's in every situation is kind of yelling into your heart. It's like noise. But when we heed God's call, the God who says, you can return to me. And the reason we can return, of course, is because he came to us in Jesus Christ and paid for our guilt so that we could be reconciled with God. And so there's always the opportunity when we stray away. There is always the opportunity. This is who God is. He's always got the door to the house open. He's always saying, you can come back home. You can come back home. Let me take charge of your life. And you will be free of these influences. Freedom is not about having no one in charge of your life. Freedom is having the right person in charge of your life. And that right person, I hate to break this to you, but the right person isn't you. You will be a tyrant over your own, believe me, because of all the different influences that are going to come in and fill the vacuum. And it's going to bring so much noise. Like, please make this decision, particularly for those of you who are younger, please make this decision at the beginning of your life, because you will live your life plagued by so many voices yelling at you, telling you what you need to do, telling you what you need to be. And do you know what it's going to do? It'll actually inhibit you. It'll cripple you, ironically. You'll actually achieve less. All these voices that say you need to do this and do that and achieve this and be this, ironically, those very voices will stop you from achieving those things. And in the midst of all of that noise, God whispers to us and he says, hey, come up here and enter into my rest. Step up back into my rest. Out of that state of unrest, he's got the door open. And he's calling all of us back into that rest. This is the way that Jesus puts the call. And it's a very well-known scripture from Matthew chapter 11. Jesus puts it like this. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened. And he means weary and burdened by all sorts of expectations that we carry, all the things that I feel that I must do to be acceptable, and weighed down by all of these things. He says, come to me. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened by all of these voices that are yelling into your life, and I will give you rest. Sabbath. This is God calling us up into his rest. Take my yoke Now, he's painting a picture here. This is a metaphor that he's using. And I'm going to speak to this metaphor in a moment. Take my yoke upon you. Now, a yoke is not what comes out of an egg, just to be clear. He's not talking about that kind of a yoke. He's talking about the big wooden thing that you put on oxen, like, say, a pair of oxen, of course, which you do all the time, I assume. It's a big wooden thing that you bind it to oxen, it's connected to the cart, whatever cart the oxen's pulling or the plow or whatever. And, it's pictured like that kind of big wooden thing that ties an oxen to a cart that the oxen's got to pull. And this is a great picture. It's a great picture, right? Because the picture here is that Jesus sees us yoked with this big heavy yoke, right? And pulling this big heavy cart, right? And he's saying, I can take that yoke off you. I can unyoke you from that cart and I can put my yoke upon you. This is what he says. Take my yoke upon you. The emphasis there is on my yoke. Rather than that yoke, take my yoke upon you. So notice, it's not having no one in charge of your life. There's still a yoke. Like, there's still a sense that there's still a sense of a life that we should live. But look what he says about it. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. And you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. There's this sense in that picture of the yoke and the cart that all of those expectations that we carry and that we put upon ourselves, I'm going to describe them as like artificial imperatives. Imperative meaning commands, right? Because, ironically, a lot of people think, I'm going to ignore God because I want to go and live the way that I want to live. People who live like that are more burdened by more rules, right? Like, seriously, there are more rules and more tyranny in that situation than you could possibly imagine. Because there's all of those expectations of society, expectations that we put upon ourselves to feel valid and acceptable. And then maybe it's expectation, even family expectations or, whatever they are. And I want you to imagine all of those expectations like big rocks that are in the cart. They're completely useless. None of them have any ultimate meaning. They're just like big boulders in the cart that we have to pull along. And every one of those that gets added to that cart, and they keep getting added, like more, right? You got to do more, right? And we can actually pull the cart for maybe pull the cart for 100 meters or whatever and feel really good about ourselves. Oh, I've pulled the cart, right? I've done a good job today, right? I've pulled this big heavy cart of all of these things that I want to achieve, right? And I feel really good about myself. And the irony is it's completely futile. You've actually done exactly nothing. Because all of those things, they are not what God is asking you to do. It's completely useless, like a bunch of random rules of things that you've just had imposed upon you. And this is what Jesus is saying. He's not even saying, let me take the things out of the cart. He's not even saying, I will lighten your load. There's plenty of self-help stuff out there that'll, tell you to, lighten the load in your cart. Let me pull out some rocks, and lots of advice out there on lightening the load in your cart. Jesus doesn't go there. He just says, I'm going to take the yoke of that cart off you altogether. I'm going to unyoke you completely from all of that, even that whole way of thinking. And here's the difference. He says, instead, I'm going to place my yoke upon you. And the difference is this: when you yoke yourself to his purpose, and remember, I've spoken about putting first things first. Jesus said, in fact, in Matthew chapter 6, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. He says, if you do that, I'll take care of all the other things, all the other concerns about life and food and clothing and getting along. And all. He said, they're all totally valid. The problem is when you put all of that first. So he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And this is the same as him saying, take my yoke upon you. See, This is the difference with the yoke of Jesus. With the yoke of God's purpose, the difference is you don't pull that cart along, that cart pulls you along. When you yoke yourself to the purpose of God, this is, now, believe me here, because I've done it the wrong way. Yoking yourself to the cart, pulling along those things. Oh, I think I've achieved. There have even been ministry goals that I've had in that cart. Like, you can even Christianize this, right? You can spiritualize. Like, oh, I've got to pray this much and I've got to do all spiritual achievement, right? And God's saying, I'm not asking you to do that. And it can all just be like rocks in the cart. Believe me, I've given this a red hot go, right? So I've, dragged the cart. And Jesus says, no. This is not how it works. And to be honest, it's exhausting and it's not sustainable. And the only thing that the cart does is that it bogs you down and it stops you from realizing everything that you could be. And Jesus says, here, take my yoke upon you. Because when you yoke yourself to the purpose of God draws you along. And it really does. It really does. Now, this is the difference. It's a very practical difference. It means getting up in the morning and whatever you've got planned tomorrow, whatever situation you're going to walk into, whether it's, a school or workplace situation or a social situation, it means that you go into that situation and instead of having all of those voices that say, you're going to do this and achieve this and be this and prove this and all of this sort of stuff going on, right? That it's just going to sabotage every opportunity it's going to sabotage every opportunity that you have. You get to wake up in the morning with the beautiful simplicity of God saying, oh, I'm already at work in that situation. I'm on the job before you are, right? And I'm going to make you a blessing in those circumstances. I'm going to make you a blessing to your workplace and to the people, right? Because I'm already at work. This is about stepping into the thing that God is already doing, but it means for you that you choose at the beginning of every day who is going to be in charge. You decide how you are going to live. Every day you wake up in the morning, you say, I'm going to follow Jesus today. Because if you don't make that decision, you'll be following someone and something, and it will exhaust you. And Jesus says, hey, come and be a part of my purpose today. And when you step into that, believe me, all of the potential that God has put in your life will come to fruition, right? Because you will have joined in with what God is doing and your life will flower. I'm not saying it'll always be easy and sometimes God leads us through tough places, but man, it can be tough walking with Jesus, but it's much harder not to. So choose today, choose tomorrow when you get up in the morning, how you are going to live your life. Which yoke are you going to wear? Because it's going to be one. Is it the yoke of Jesus or is it the yoke of all of those other things? And can I implore you, let Jesus take charge.